Scotland, an ancient and magical land with a rich and diverse history and culture, consisting of almost 800 islands, from the rich and fertile farmlands of the south to the majestic mountains and deep lochs of the Highlands. So what of the people? Who were they? The first recorded evidence of Scotland's indigenous people are the Celtic tribes of the lands the Romans called Caledonia. Caledonians were enemies of the Roman Empire, who had unsuccessfully attempted to incorporate them into the Roman province of Britannia on multiple occasions. These unsuccessful attempts were apparent by the Roman army's construction of Hadrian's Wall and Antonine Wall, marking the northernmost frontier of the Roman Empire.
With the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Roman army were expelled from Britain, leaving behind a crumbling infrastructure and a new name for the indigenous people of Caledonia, the Picts, or the Painted Ones.
The Picts were well known for their intricate carvings in their jewellery and stone, which was mirrored in the paintings and tattoos on their bodies. The discovery of their dwellings, artefacts and social hierarchies shows the first evidence of an established society.
But several centuries later, in one of Europe's unsolved mysteries, the Picts seem to just vanish into thin air.
So what did happen to the Picts? Well, one important element of their life we do know is their conversion to Christianity. Migrant Celts from Ireland known as the Gaels and the Scoti settled in modern day Argyll and Bute in an area that became part of the Kingdom of Dalriada, a kingdom encompassing areas of both modern day Scotland and Ireland. In AD 563, the missionary St Columba came to Scotland from Donegal in Ireland, and it was St Columba who is traditionally credited as being the principal influence in converting the people of Scotland to Christianity. At this time the word Scotia denoted Ireland, and its inhabitants were a Scoti. This is perhaps the first solid link between the people of Scotland and Ireland. The Scots expanded east and north at the expense of the Picts. These newly acquired lands, along with their people, became absorbed into a new kingdom in AD 843, when King Kenneth I, King of the Scots of Dalriada, also became King of the Picts, and within a few years the birth of a modern-day Scotland had begun, with the formation of the Kingdom of Alba. Over the following centuries, the Kingdom of Alba absorbed the neighbouring separate kingdoms such as Strathclyde and Lothian, and by the 1300s, Scotland came to be the name for the whole land, and the Scots were her inhabitants, regardless of their origin. The origins of the creation of Scotland and Ireland and its people are intrinsically linked, and it's easy to subscribe to the romance of their inhabitants being in unison, but the reality perhaps couldn't be further from the truth. By the 16th century, a major divide had begun to manifest. After centuries of Christianity being dominated and defined by the Catholic Church, the people across Europe began to tire of threats of heresy and the continuation of their hard-earned cash being taxed to fund the lifestyles of the wealthy. This gave rise to people beginning to protest and the formation of a new Protestant belief. The Reformation quickly reached the shores of the British Isles. However, its growth began to differ somewhat. In England, King Henry VIII desired an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon to allow him to marry Anne Boleyn. This was duly refused by the Pope, and Henry did the unthinkable. Using the Reformation as a cover, he broke ties with Rome and declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England, which would allow him to decide England's religious future, including rules about divorce and annulment. Elsewhere, however, things took a slightly different turn. Whilst England had for the most part succumbed to the new Protestant Reformation, further divisions within Scotland and Ireland emerged, with the latter almost completely rejecting the new beliefs. The Reformation also resulted in mixed opinions within Scotland, and in 1543, following its break with the Catholic Church, England attacked Scotland with the aim to create a new alliance between the two countries by forcing the Scottish Parliament to approve the marriage of Henry VIII's son Edward to Mary, Queen of Scots.
Mary was born here at Linlithgow Palace in 1542. Her father, King James V of Scotland, lay ill in his bed with a fever. 6 days later, he died, leaving baby Mary, the Queen of Scotland.
Mary continued to live here for another 6 years, during which time it was feared she may be abducted, as the Scottish Parliament had refused to ratify the agreement of Mary's marriage to the English prince. Iron grills called yeats were fitted to the palace windows to protect the young queen.
I can't even begin to imagine how terrifying Mary's life must have been. What we deem as unthinkable today, the abduction of a monarch, was very much a possibility in the 16th century.
Mary was sent to France in 1548 to be the bride of the Dauphin, the young French prince, in order to secure a Catholic alliance against Protestant England. However, in 1561, the Dauphin died and Mary returned to Scotland. Mary's only child James was born in 1566 from her marriage to Lord Darnley, and after Mary was forced to abdicate, he became King James VI of Scotland. When Queen Elizabeth I of England died childless in 1603, James, being heir to the throne, also became King James I of England in a ceremony known as the Union of the Crowns. Ireland had been in a personal union with England since 1542, when the Irish Parliament passed an act proclaiming the English monarch to also to be King or Queen of Ireland, and as such, James styled himself as King of Great Britain and Ireland. It sounds almost as if peace had come to all three nations, but this was definitely not the case.
The next step in my journey brings me to Northern Ireland, and I'm here in the heart of the city of Belfast. Belfast today is like any other modern European city, bustling with people and a mix of cultural diversity.
But just a mile or so away from the busy city centre, a somewhat different picture is painted. Diversity becomes division. Neighbourhoods are separated by both mental and physical barriers. On one side, the nationalists, who believe in the reunification of Ireland, and on the other, the loyalists, who believe in a union with the United Kingdom. In Northern Ireland, the late 1960s saw the beginning of a dark period, particularly in Belfast and Derry, with a conflict lasting almost 30 years. Known as the Troubles, the conflict was primarily a political, nationalistic or even territorial conflict. Despite the two sides being referred to as Catholic and Protestant, it was not solely a religious conflict. A key issue was political and constitutional status of Northern Ireland, an issue that's still unresolved today, albeit without the same levels of violence of the Troubles. On one side, the Unionists, who want to remain part of the United Kingdom, and on the other, the Republicans, who believe in a reunification with the Republic of Ireland. Repeating tensions led to the August 1969 riots in Bogside, Derry, which is often seen as marking the start of the Troubles. Tensions were further increased with the deployment of British troops into Northern Ireland, particularly after the events of January 1972, known as Bloody Sunday, where 26 unarmed civilians were shot by the British Army. More than 3,500 people were killed during the Troubles. Tragically, the majority of deaths were not members of paramilitary groups or British security forces, but civilians. The Troubles were largely brought to an end by the Good Friday Agreement, or the Belfast Agreement, a pair of agreements signed on 10th of April 1998. It was a major development in the Northern Ireland peace process and was made up of the multi-party agreement between most of Northern Ireland political parties and the British-Irish Agreement between the British and Irish governments. The agreement was approved by voters across the island of Ireland in two referendums held on the 22nd of May 1998.
So did the Good Friday Agreement bring peace or resolution to the people of Northern Ireland?
The Troubles had involved numerous riots, protests, civil disobedience and tit-for-tat violence, ultimately leading to increased segregation and the creation of no-go areas. With tensions reaching boiling point, intense sectarian violence had broken out in Belfast between the loyalist community of the Shankill Road and the nationalist community of the Falls Road.
Alarmed by the scale and ferocity of the violence, the The British Army were called in to erect so-called peace walls to create a division between the two communities. Today, stretching some 800 metres, this section of the wall is almost 8 metres high. It's been an effective division between the two communities over the years, but is it a remnant of the past?
Today, Belfast houses almost 20 miles of walls, fences, gates and closed roads. Located primarily in the working class communities, it in fact now has more walls than it did at the time of the Good Friday Agreement. These serve as not only physical barriers separating communities, but as psychological barriers and reminders of the sectarian divisions that have long existed within the city. Yet despite the walls being visual evidence of division, the graffiti, murals and messages on the wall are not symbols of sectarianism as one might expect, but messages of peace, of love and hope from around the world. So how are the Troubles and the political climate in Ireland linked to Scotland? Are these divisions replicated? Like the majority of working class areas, an integral part of everyday life is sport, in particular football or soccer, and Northern Ireland is no exception. Two of the most supported clubs in Northern Ireland are Celtic and Rangers, as evidenced here by their respective stores in Belfast city centre. But somewhat unusually, neither football club's home is actually in Northern Ireland, but instead are both located in Glasgow, Scotland. And many people argue that this is yet another symbol of division, as out with these two teams there is generally very little interest in Scottish football. Fans of these clubs in both Scotland and in Northern Ireland are traditionally associated with religious divide. Although not necessarily accurate, Rangers are associated with Protestantism and Celtic with Catholicism. And similarly to Belfast, areas of Glasgow are associated with their respective team or religion. The reality though is that whilst the sectarian divide is visually apparent in some areas of Glasgow, it is thankfully in a minority, and most of today's areas are actually inhabited by a mix of members of all faiths and none. The overwhelming message in both Scotland and Northern Ireland is that the people are tired of religious intolerance, and sectarian division is a barrier on the route to progression. Is it accurate to draw comparisons for Scotland as a whole using a select few communities as an example? The answer is probably not. The 2022 census in Scotland revealed a landmark statistic with regard to religion. For the first time in recorded history, Scotland has no majority religion. 14% describe themselves as Catholic, 27% as Protestant, and a colossal 55% identify as having no religion.
So where does that place Scotland today with regards to progression and the path to the future?
I would suggest that one of the biggest issues in relation to Scotland's future is the constitutional question. Should Scotland be an independent country? Certainly there are countless arguments for and against, but again, this differing of opinions is just another of the many divisions among the people.
Scotland is clearly a progressive nation, rich in culture and diversity, but it's divided not just on the constitution, but sovereignty, religion, sport, language, territory, education, politics, the list goes on.
The difficulty lies within the blood boundaries of these groups. There is no binary categorisation, but instead a multitude of beliefs and opinions spanning these divisions, creating a highly complex plethora of subdivisions over which none can ever become prevalent.
Is there a place for all these subdivisions in Scotland's future? Or do we need to attempt to separate the conservative from the progressive? I guess only time will tell.
from which we'll rise.